where the world is heading. Also, just a little bit of poetic license. We have this technology, entertainment, design conference, but I want to rename TED just for the next 18 minutes, Technology, Economics, and Destiny. We're going to talk about today Techonomics, the dawning of the virtual age. A little bit of a roadmap of where I intend to take you. First of all, the early seeds of this virtual age come from telepresence. I'll take you back on a Wayback Machine of about 30 years to the Oak Ridge National Laboratory and some of the work that was done there to begin with. Then I want to talk with you about metrics, about the human experience. It's one thing to take our senses and to be able to remote them, but it's something else to take the human experience, both individually and collectively, and do the same. And then finally, we'll talk about the trends that are actually driving these things at an exponential rate today. Begin with the end in mind. I want to speak with you about virtualization. And in simplistic terms, virtualization is the ability to do more and more with less and less until you can do just about anything from just about anywhere, just about any time, with almost nothing at all. So that's the end in mind. Hopefully I'll convince you that that is where we are headed. The beginning of my story begins with telepresence. The word tele, or the prefix tele, means at a distance. Of course, presence means the ability to be there at a distance. Back in the 80s, we were working at Oak Ridge in the nuclear community and also in the space community to be able to take human capabilities and to project them at a distance, either because of the distance of space or because of the lack of the desire to be in a radioactive environment. Take your pick. This is what it looked like back then. You have, in essence, a human controller. He's looking through televisions. He's moving a manipulator that looks very much like a robot in this environment. You have a second system that almost replicates as exactly. We were working on going from the analog domain to the digital domain at that juncture, so that what this gentleman saw and what he did was actually replicated in a facility that was equivalent to a fuel processing plant, a petroleum refinery, so to speak, that's behind 6 feet of concrete and a couple of inches of stainless steel. And once things go in there, it's 30 years zero-man access coming out. So we had to develop the capabilities with those robotic systems to replace pumps and valves and equipment. The beginning of telepresence. Let's look at our friend here and look at yourself. We think about the senses that we have to live life with. We see things, we hear things, we talk, we touch, we feel, we move. And we have, and you're very, very familiar with, these tele-technologies. Television, you've grown up with it. The telephone, you've grown up with it. The telegraph, way before your time, even my time with the gray hair, okay? The teletext, the beginning of the web. And some of those things that are on the horizon, telepathy, teleportation, telekinesis, and then what I was showing you there, telemanipulation. But what I really want to show you in depth is how we are moving towards this virtual world where we are actually expanding in time and space the abilities of the human being. We had a problem with those manipulators, and that was how we could see very well in this remote environment. And what you can see in this drawing is a pretty complex system for moving a couple of large cameras to pan and tilt and move around. And what we actually had happening in the real world there is that we were running our eyes into the facility we were trying to work with our hands down here. We couldn't see what was going on. So an idea comes along, as so many times ideas come along when there is a need presented. In this case, the idea was to use something called a fisheye lens. Now, believe it or not, you're very, very familiar with fisheye lenses. If you've ever been into a hotel room and you've looked through the peephole there, okay? You see the person's feet, you see the ceilings, and their nose gets really big, all right? It gives you this kind of a picture, which actually happens to be looking up from a road surface. That picture is extremely distorted. But there is a mathematical representation that will represent that picture in a way that's very familiar with you and me, with your experience. I want to take just a moment, and if the internet world will work with me, we will take just a moment to take a look at a picture that comes to you, taken at a different time, in a different space, to take you somewhere else. And so now, depending on what I want it to be, my imagination, my visual function is in the middle of a very famous chapel in Italy. And I can look at any part of this that I want to, experience any way I want to. It begins to have value at the point in time where you say, I want to look at a house, I want to look at an apartment, I want to look at a hotel room, I want to look at a museum, I want to be somewhere in time and space that I'm not. More than the senses, what is the human condition about? I want to give you a couple of thoughts about the human condition, both on an individual level and on an organization, corporate, cultural level, and then take you back to show you how technology is changing. This is a metric that was developed by a gentleman named John Danforth. It's old. I'm telling you, this goes back to about 1925. Danforth was the founder of the Ralston Purina Company. You know Ralston Purina, dog chow, puppy chow, cat chow, pony chow, monkey chow, okay? And every person that went to work with Purina, this was the introduction to the company of the kind of life that they wanted you to lead to be, quote unquote, successful. And what the four pillars of personal balance were what Ralston Purina and what Mr. Danforth taught his employees. And in simplistic terms, he's saying your life as an individual is time limited. How you spend your time is what you will never recover again. So if we have balance, he challenged his folks to draw a square and to label it mental, physical, relational, and spiritual. He says, my goal is for you to be balanced in these things. And then he said, all right, I want you to do this. Draw a four-sided figure that really represents how you are using that precious resource called time to improve each one of these areas. And I want you to do this once a year and come up with a plan for how you are optimally using your time to lead a balanced life. You getting enough sleep? You eating things right? Are you studying and preparing so that you are making a better mental capability? How are your relationships? How are your relationships in person? How are your relationships spiritually? Well, I took that thought process because this is one of these kinds of books that's given to you as a high school senior, and you put it on the shelf and it gets dust for about 10 years, and then you're moving or something, you pull it out and say, what's this I Dare You book about? And you take a look and you go, that's kind of interesting. That's when you've gained about 20 pounds and you're going, man, I'm not quite physically like I need to be. I'm out of school, I'm not reading quite as much as I used to read, you know, and I'm focused. For entrepreneurs, they sometimes get very, very focused just on the companies that they start, and balance goes away. So I teach my entrepreneurship students, balance is very, very important. Let's take it to an organizational level. The mental leap that I want you to make with me is that an organization is nothing but a collection of individuals. So if I thought that Danforth's work was interesting on an individual level, and that square and that balance was important to individual success, what do those parameters, what do those pillars begin to look like in an organization? And think of any organization. That can be a club, that can be a state, that can be a nation, that can be a culture. So we take the mental side, and that becomes computation. We take the communication, the relational side, it becomes communication. We take the physical side, and it becomes the fiscal side. And we take the spiritual side, and it becomes the community. So in essence, we look at the computational side of an organization. What's your research and development look like? What do you know about your customers? What do you know about your stakeholders? Where are you planning for the future? How are you utilizing technology and data, et cetera, to be better and better at what you do? The communicational side. If I don't have a relationship with my shareholders, if I don't have a relationship with my employees, then in essence, I have to communicate to have that relationship. The fiscal side, am I in the red or am I in the black? And those are very, very simple ways of determining the health and the strength of companies, because as opposed to the limiter of time for the individual, the limiter of capital is the challenge for organizations, for corporations. And then finally, the community side, of the spiritual side of the organization. We all know about corporate culture. We talk about it all the time. What does the spirit of the corporation look like? Does the left hand know what the right hand's doing? So the computational, fiscal, communication, and community. Now I'd like to backtrack with you just a little bit. This is where I'm going to bring telepresence and Techonomics into play. It turns out that telepresence is a great way to make money. The fact of the matter is that there's a lot of opportunity to be made in being somewhere that you're not. So hold that thought. Techonomics, though, is this concatenation, this portmanteau of taking technology, which is the driver, the initiator of change, and the economy, which is the filter of the things that are successful. So if all of the ideas that see the light of day, some of them make economic sense, and they hang around for the next generation to procreate the next series of ideas. So this techonomic idea is this thought process that technology is a mutant, but the economy is the determiner of what succeeds and what survives. I wrote a book called Techonomics about 8 years ago, and I want to present to you the first 3 laws of techonomics from that book because they tie into all of these points that I'm trying to make with you. Moore's law, exponential electronic performance advancement. Metcalfe's law, exponential network interconnection. And Coase's law, perfect information diminishing organizational size. Let's start with Moore's law. Gordon Moore was a graduate student like some of you at Stanford back in the 60s. He wrote a paper, made one simple suggestion in that paper. Every 18 months to 2 years, the price of computation was going to cut in half, or the amount of computation you could get digitally was going to double in that same time frame. This drawing is simply a linear in time, logarithmic in number of elements of the microprocessors that Intel created and released in a given set of years. The red line there is a perfect representation of the 18-month cycle of a doubling. Double, double, double. So I won't force you to cooperate with me, but in essence, this is what Moore's law means. I am now holding above my head more computational capability than was in the lunar module that put a man on the moon in 1969. So I don't know about you, but I'm not strong enough to hold up a lunar module, and I for dang sure know I couldn't afford to buy one. Okay? So that is what Moore's law means to you. Metcalfe's law, a guy named Bob Metcalfe formed a company called 3Com, and what he found out was that when he started sticking boards in the back of computers, all of a sudden there was a nonlinear relationship. 2 computers, 1 connection, 3 computers, 3 connections, 4 computers, 6 connections. By the time we've got 8 computers, we're making 28 connections by just plugging one more into the net. By the time I've got 1.23 billion members of Facebook and I add one more, I didn't make one more connection. I made over 1 billion more connections. That's Metcalfe's law. The key point to remember out of this is 91% of the world's population today lives within the reach of a cell tower. So this piece is now within the range of 91% of the people that live on the planet. Come along another gentleman. I'm again back about 100 years, a fellow named Ron Coase, economist from England, came to the United States, wanted to study in a free market economy how many people does an organization employ if nobody's telling them how many people to employ. So he goes to Ford Motor Company, he studies their production processes, and he comes up with something called transaction cost analysis, which in layman's terms, in simple terms, is the make or buy decision. Am I going to make something in-house, or am I going to buy it from someone else? And he theorized in this dark ages before the internet, before the web, before email, before all of the things that we take for granted today, he theorized that there will come a day when something called perfect information exists. And at that juncture, we will buy many more things than we make. And so hence the Ford Motor Company vertical integration of the 1920s turns into assembly plants of many, many logistic networks that makes our vehicles today and everything else, the make or buy decision. Now, step back with me just a moment as we go back to our organizational impact that's resulted from all of these key areas. Moore's law says that computationally, we are changing at an exponential rate, the cost dropping off the table and the capability. As a result, we've got smart tennis shoes, we've got smart garments, we've got smartphones, we've got smart vehicles, we've got smart houses, we've got electronics in just about everything. Metcalfe's law, all of a sudden, it's less expensive to connect all of these things together. I've shared with you 91% of the world's population in the range of a cell tower. So now we are all very interconnected. The Coase's law talks about virtualization. Now we have communities where we actually have communities that stretch across the world as far as logistics are concerned, and we have an organization called Facebook, which would, if it were a country, would be the 3rd largest country in the world, very close to overtaking India this year and China next year in the number of members. And then finally, we've got currency. We've gone from currency that was backed by gold, something tangible, to something that was backed by paper, something a little bit less tangible that was backed by faith and electrons, and now we're headed to something called Bitcoin that's not backed by anything. So the virtual world is very much upon us. Each side of the square, each side of the organizational square, the cultural square, is under massive change in your lifetime. So I see a great convergence ahead. All these things that we used to hold in our hands, the telephone, the television, going to the store, the CD, the shopping experience, the calculator, the typewriter, the money, is going through a crank of analog to digital, exponential miniaturization, network expansion, exponential bandwidth expansion, and finally wireless ubiquity, till we turn the crank and out pops the world in your pocket. And you're living through it. And every one of those was companies that are now being overtaken by different approaches. The virtualization of everything. Encyclopedia to Wikipedia, records to MP3s, Office Assistant to Siri, books to ebooks, video rental to MP4 downloads, phone reception to Siri, photographs to digital imaging, currency to Bitcoin, mail to email, clubs to social media, brick and mortar to e-commerce, papers to blogs, network TV to YouTube, and of course, life to Second Life. We followed what Nicholas Negroponte at the MIT Media Lab called atoms to bits in his book called Being Digital. He predicted it 20 years ago, and we are there. Let's revisit our friend. All of his senses now have been overtaken by new constructs in the economy over the last few years. YouTube takes his eyes, and FaceTime takes his eyes and his ears. Skype takes his ears and his mouth. All of a sudden, email, messaging, even Kiva automation, and now these things we call teleportation and telekinesis. You know, Amazon and Google and Apple are all trying to figure out what you're going to do before you do it so they can sell it to you. What's ahead? Where are we going? Education to virtual education, the Khan Academy and Udacity, healthcare to virtual medicine, interactive immersion, Oculus Rift, law to virtual law, LegalZoom, delivery to the telecopter from Amazon and the Department of Defense, and finally manufacturing to this databases in the sky, and you can build anything at home. It's all coming. It's all around the way. So we live in the virtual age. We've seen the industrial age, electrification, communication, space exploration, computerization, digitization, globalization, and we are on the threshold of virtualization as we speak. So our destination, the virtual age. The ability to do more and more with less and less until you can do just about everything from just about anywhere, just about any time, with almost nothing at all. Thanks for bearing with me as we talked about technology, education, and design. And we changed it to technology, economics, and destiny exponentially. I will close by saying that about 9 years ago, Thomas Friedman wrote a book, The World is Flat. And it was a very, very big hit at the time, talking about globalization. I would say to you that today, you're standing on the threshold of the world being virtual. Find a way to make your opportunity there. Thank you very much.